The stars outside the viewport did not move, but everything else was falling apart. Captain Dale Harmon stood at the front of the war room aboard the UES Ironclad and looked at the holographic map floating in the center of the table. Red markers filled the outer sectors. Blue markers, which represented Allied ships, were disappearing one by one. The Calvara Passage, which had once been a strong defensive line, was now nothing more than wreckage and silence. The battle there had ended 6 hours ago. The Vreth Dominion had not won it cleanly, they had simply crushed it. 3 Allied fleets had gone in and fewer than a quarter of them had come back. The Thavin had lost their flagship. The Sarathi had pulled out early, which was something they had never done before in recorded history. And the Drankai had simply stopped responding to signals halfway through the fight. Dale had not been at Calvara. The Ironclad and 13 other human vessels had been held in reserve waiting for an order to advance that never came. By the time the Allied command decided to call in the reserve, there was nothing left to reinforce. They had just told the humans to hold position and not waste themselves on a lost cause. Dale had held position, but he had not slept since. His tactical lieutenant, Laura Sims, walked into the war room and set a data pad on the table without saying anything. Dale picked it up and read it. It was a casualty report from the combined Allied fleet. The numbers were bad enough that Dale set the pad face down and did not look at it again. The council is meeting in 20 minutes. Laura said, all senior commanders are expected. Dale nodded. He straightened his uniform, which did not need straightening, and walked toward the door. The council chamber was aboard the Thavin command vessel, a wide and dimly lit ship that smelled faintly of something like burnt copper. Dale always found the Thavin ships uncomfortable, not because they were hostile, but because they were built for a species with 4 arms and very little sense of personal space. Every surface curved in a way that made human eyes work harder than they should have to. The room was already full when Dale arrived. The Thavin High Admiral, a tall creature with pale gray skin and deep-set black eyes, was standing at the center of the chamber. The Sarathi High Marshal stood nearby, his scaled arms folded, his expression unreadable. 2 Drankai commanders sat at the far end of the table, their bioluminescent markings dim, which Dale had learned was their version of quiet grief. Laura took a position just behind Dale's shoulder. She always did that in council meetings. Dale had never asked her to. She had simply decided it was where she should be, and she was usually right about things like that. The Thavin High Admiral called the meeting to order and wasted no time. We have reviewed the losses from Calvara, the Admiral said. His translator rendered the words in flat, clean English. The conclusion of the Joint Strategic Committee is that the Vreth Dominion cannot be stopped with the forces we currently have available. The outer colonies beyond the Heron Shelf are no longer defensible. We are recommending a full strategic withdrawal to the inner systems. Dale listened. He did not speak yet. He had learned a long time ago that the first person to speak in a room full of scared commanders usually lost the argument before it started. The Sarathi High Marshal spoke next. The withdrawal is not a defeat. It is a repositioning. We preserve what forces we have and build a new line closer to the core Systems. The Vreth will not advance beyond Harran. Without cost. The Vreth have never stopped advancing, one of the Drankai commanders said softly, not once in their history. The room went quiet. Dale stepped forward. How long before they reach Harran? The Thavine admiral looked at him. 8 days at their current rate of movement. And the outer colonies, hey, the ones we are leaving behind. No one answered that question directly. The Sarathi marshal looked at the table. The Drankai commander looked away. The Thavine admiral simply held Dale's gaze and said, "They will have time to evacuate to the inner systems if we begin the withdrawal." Now, Dale knew that was not entirely true. Some colonies would get out, others would not. The Vreth did not destroy populated worlds immediately, but what they did to them after conquest was not something Dale allowed himself to think about for too long. "I need a vote recorded," Dale said. "I am opposed to the withdrawal." The room stirred. Several commanders shifted in their seats. The Thavine admiral's expression did not change, but his secondary eyelids, the thin inner ones that Thavine used when they were surprised, flickered. Once, Captain Harmon, the admiral said carefully, "The decision has been reviewed by every senior strategic mind. In the Accord, the mathematics do not support continued engagement." "I understand the mathematics," Dale said. "I am still opposed." Laura, standing behind him, said nothing, but he could feel her standing a little straighter. The vote was taken. Every senior commander except Dale signed the withdrawal order. The Thavine admiral accepted the result, thanked the council for their time, and then looked at Dale with something that was almost pity. "Captain Harmon, the withdrawal begins in 6 hours. Your ships are expected to fall in with the human fleet grouping at Waypoint 7. Please ensure your crew is ready to move." Dale nodded once, turned and walked out of the chamber, and Laura fell into step beside him as they moved through the curved corridor back toward the shuttle bay. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "They are not wrong about the numbers," Laura said at last. "I know," Dale said. 14 ships against a full Vreth armada is not a battle, it is a memorial service. I know that too. So what are we doing?" Dale stopped walking. They were alone in the corridor. The ship hummed quietly around them, the low vibration of a vessel at rest. Dale looked at the far wall for a moment, then at Laura. "We are not leaving," he said. Laura looked at him for a long time. She was a practical person. She had grown up in a small town in Montana and had spent 12 years in the fleet and had never once made a decision she had not thought through carefully. Dale knew all of this about her, and he had read her file before requesting her for the Ironclad, and he had not regretted it once in 3 years. She looked at him now and said, "All right." That was all, just all right. They walked back to the shuttle bay together. Outside the Thavine ship's viewport, the stars were still and cold and very far away. Somewhere beyond them, 8 days out, a Vreth armada the size of a small moon was moving forward, confident in the way that things are confident when they have never been stopped. 8 days. Dale thought about the 14 ships under his command. He thought about their crews, their weapons loadouts, their fuel reserves. He thought about the Harran Shelf and the debris field that the retreating fleets had left behind. He thought about what 14 ships could do if they were positioned correctly and crewed by people who did not know how to stop. The shuttle moved through the dark, and the ironclad grew larger in the viewport, its hull scarred from a dozen engagements, its running lights steady and calm. Dale watched it come and said nothing more. There was a great deal of work to do before morning. The message went out at 200 hours ship time. It was not a formal transmission. Dale did not use the official Accord communication channels because those were monitored, and he did not want to spend the next hour explaining himself to the Thavine admiral again. Instead, he used the short-range human fleet band, the one they used for informal coordination, and he sent a single line to every human commander in the sector. War Room Ironclad 400. Bring your senior staff. This is not a drill, and it is not a goodbye. By 400, 14 commanders were seated or standing in every available space inside the ironclad's war room. Some had come in uniform, others had clearly been sleeping and had not bothered to fix that. Commander Priya Oakes, who ran tactical weapons for the third vessel in the human formation, was eating something out of a ration pack and looking at the holographic map like it owed her money. Chief Engineer Calvin Brent was leaning against the back wall with a coffee mug and the expression of a man who had already done the math and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. Senior pilot Nadia Cross sat near the front. She was young for her rank, which she had earned early because she flew in ways that made senior officers simultaneously grateful and terrified. Yeah, she had said nothing since sitting down, but her eyes had not stopped moving around the room. Dale stood at the center and waited until the side conversations died down. I am going to say this once, he said. The Accord is withdrawing. The official order is signed. Every Allied ship in this sector is going to be at waypoint 7 inside the next 6 hours, and then moving toward the inner systems. Nobody is stopping them, and I am not asking them to stop. He let that sit for a moment. We are not going. The room did not erupt. These were not the kind of people who erupted. There were a few slow exhales, a few quiet looks exchanged, and then Commander Priya Oakes set down her ration pack and said, "Okay, what is the plan?" That was more or less the entire debate. Dale pulled up the tactical map and walked them through the Heron Shelf. It was a wide stretch of space filled with the debris of old mining stations and the wreckage of the ships lost at Kelvara. Sensors moved strangely in the shelf because of the scattered metal and residual energy signatures. It was not easy to navigate, and it was even harder to fight in for a standard fleet. That was a problem for 14 human ships crewed by people who had trained in dense asteroid belts and had grown up on stories about doing more with less. It was an advantage. The Vreth will come through the shelf because it is the direct route, Dale said. They will not go around it because going around adds 3 days, and they do not think they need to. They have no reason to think 14 ships left behind are anything more than stragglers. So we use the debris for cover, Calvin said from the back wall. And we use their contempt, Priya added. She was already pulling up weapons data on a secondary screen. They are going to approach expecting a quick cleanup job. They will not have their full combat formation deployed. They will figure it out fast. One of The other commanders said his name was Victor Cole, and he ran a mid-range escort vessel called the UES Ridgeline. He was not pessimistic by nature, but he was thorough, which sometimes looked the same. Once they realize we are actually fighting, they will bring everything forward. Yes, Dale said, which is why we need to make those first 20 minutes count more than anything else. We hurt them fast, we stay unpredictable, and we make them slow down. We do not need to destroy the Armada. We need to hold them long enough for the Allied fleet to regroup at Waypoint 7 and come back ready to fight. You think they will come back? Nadia asked. It was the first thing she had said. I think when they see what we are doing, some of them will feel bad enough to come back, Dale said. That got a few quiet laughs. What followed was 4 hours of work that would have looked chaotic to anyone watching from outside, but felt to the people inside it like building something solid out of a pile of parts that did not match. Priya walked the commanders through the synchronized strike pattern she had been modeling in her spare time for the past 2 weeks. She had built them quietly, without being asked because she was the kind of person who spent her off hours doing that. The patterns relied on the human ships moving in ways that stretched the limits of what the vessels could take, and they relied on the crews inside those ships being able to keep functioning when the hits came. Calvin took 3 engineers aside and started going through the drive modification work he had already done on the Ironclad. He had been adjusting the power routing systems to allow the ship to take more damage before losing propulsion at the cost of putting more stress on the hull. He had done it quietly and technically, without authorization, which he did not seem particularly concerned about. If anyone wants to write me up for it after we survive, I will accept that, he said to no one in particular. Nadia spent her time with the other pilots. She drew formations on a tablet with her finger, erasing and redrawing, talking in a low voice about angles and velocities and the specific ways that Vreth gunners tracked moving targets. She had studied their targeting systems, the way some people studied music, finding the patterns and the gaps in the moments where something unexpected would break the rhythm. Nobody talked about the odds. There was nothing to say about the odds that the odds had not already said for themselves. The point was not the odds. At some point during the 4th hour, a Thavian officer named Rilvan appeared at the war room door. He was a young observer who had been assigned to the human fleet 6 months ago as part of an Accord exchange program. Dale had largely forgotten he was aboard. Rilvan stood in the doorway for a moment, and watching the room full of human officers arguing over maps and equations and drive schematics, and then he asked quietly if he could come in. Dale waved him in without looking up. Rilvan found a corner and stood there. For the rest of the session, he did not speak. He watched Priya Oaks rebuild a weapons timing sequence 3 times until it did what she wanted. He watched Calvin Brent explain a power rerouting trick to 2 other engineers, using a coffee mug and a data pad as props. He watched Nadia Cross close her eyes in the middle of a conversation and then open them and say, "No, do it like this," and draw something on her tablet. That made the other pilots lean in. Somewhere around the 6th hour, Rilvan stepped out into the corridor and sent a message back to the Thavian command channel. It was a short message, because he was still processing what he had seen and did not have more words than this. I do not think they understand that. They are supposed to give up. Back inside the war room, Dale looked at the map one more time. The Vreth Armada was 7 days out now. The debris field was waiting. The plan was as ready as it was going to get. He told his commanders to go rest. There would be no more chances to rest after this. Most of them went. A few stayed and kept working. Dale was not surprised by that at all. On the 7th day the Vreth came. They appeared on long-range sensors as a wall of signals so dense that the ironclad scanning system had to recalibrate twice before it could give an accurate count. Dale stood on the bridge and looked at the number that came back and did not say anything for a moment. Laura, standing at the station to his left, read the same number and said, "Well, yeah," Dale said. There were hundreds of Vreth vessels in that formation. The exact count changed as the Armada moved because the smaller ships kept shifting position the way schools of fish shifted, fluid and constant. At the center were the capital ships, huge dark things that moved slowly and did not need to move quickly because nothing had ever made them hurry before. Dale opened the shipwide channel. "All hands, this is the captain. Sensors confirm the Vreth Armada is 7 hours out. Battle stations at 600, get some food and water in you now, because once we start, I do not know when we stop. You all know what we are doing out here. You all chose to be here. I am proud of every one of you." Harmon out. He closed the channel and turned to Laura. "They anything from the Allied fleet?" "They are at waypoint 7, she said. "They are watching our beacon." "Good." He sent one message to the Allied command channel before the battle began. It was addressed to every senior commander in the Accord. It said, "We are holding at Heron Shelf. Go regroup. If we call for you, come ready to fight." He did not wait for a reply. The 7 hours passed faster than he expected. The ironclad sat deep inside the debris field with 12 other vessels positioned around it in the pattern Priya had designed. The 14th ship, the Ridgeline under Victor Cole, was positioned at the outer edge of the field in a place where Vreth sensors would pick it up early. It was Bate and Victor had volunteered for it without being asked, but Nadia Cross was in her fighter before the Armada crossed the 3-hour mark. She sat in the cockpit, running her pre-flight checks for the 4th time, not because she needed to, but because it gave her hands something to do. The other pilots in her wing were doing the same thing. They were young and skilled, and none of them had ever seen a fight this size. "Talk to me," one of them said over the wing channel. His name was Ben Farrell, and he was 23 years old and the second best pilot in the fleet. "I have been looking at how their forward gunners track," Nadia said. "They lead the target by a fixed amount. Based on current velocity, they are very good at it. They almost never miss." "That is not exactly comforting," Ben said. "The trick is you change velocity mid-approach, not gradually, sharp. They are so used to targets that move predictably that a sudden shift breaks their calculation. They have to reset. It takes about 2 seconds. 2 seconds is not much." "It is enough," Nadia said. "Just make sure you change direction before they expect it, not after." Ben was quiet for a moment. "How do you know when they expect it?" "You develop a feeling," Nadia said. "I will show you." At 600, the Vreth Forward Strike Force broke off from the main armada and moved toward the shelf. It was a force of perhaps 30 ships, which the Vreth clearly considered more than enough to handle whatever was waiting. They moved in a confident formation, weapons warm but not fully deployed, which meant they were treating this as a cleanup rather than a battle. They saw the ridgeline first, just as Dale had planned, and the ridgeline opened fire and then moved deeper into the debris field. The Vreth formation adjusted and followed, spreading out slightly to navigate the wreckage. That was when the other 13 ships opened fire from every direction at once. The first 60 seconds were very loud and very bright. Priya Oaks sat at her weapon station and ran the synchronized strike sequence she had built in her spare time over 2 weeks of sleepless nights, and it worked the way she had dreamed it would work. 4 Vreth ships went dark in the first pass. 3 more lost propulsion and drifted. The Vreth formation broke apart as individual commanders tried to find targets that kept moving in ways that did not make sense. On the bridge of the ironclad, Dale watched the tactical display and called adjustments. He was calm in the way that people are calm when they have already accepted the worst and are now just focused on the work. Laura matched his tone, reading out data in a steady voice, never once letting alarm into it, even when a Vreth strike hit the ironclad's port side and the ship shook hard enough to knock a junior officer off her feet. Hull breach on deck 7, Laura said. Sealing now, no casualties. Keep us moving, Dale said. Nadia let her fighter wing directly into the center of the Vreth formation. It was the most dangerous place to be, and it was exactly where she needed to be. She flew the way she had described to Ben, changing velocity mid-approach and sharp abrupt shifts that broke the Vreth targeting rhythm. The gunfire that should have hit her kept passing just behind or just ahead. Oh, she could feel where it was going before it arrived, which was something she could not explain and had stopped trying to. Ben Farrell followed her and copied the technique with enough success that he made it through the first pass. On the second pass, a Vreth blast caught his wing and he lost steering on the right side. I'm still flying, he said over the channel before Nadia could ask. Stay in the formation, she said. Where else would I go, he said. The Vreth strike force, which had come expecting a quick and easy fight, found itself in a battle that moved too fast and came from too many directions. They were not losing, not by any count. That made sense on paper. They still had more ships and more firepower, but they could not pin the human vessels down, and every time they thought they had isolated one, something else hit them from a different angle. The Vreth commander sent for reinforcements. That was the moment Dale had been waiting for. The moment the forward force sent for help was the moment the Vreth admitted this was not a cleanup, it was a fight, and fights took time, and time was exactly what Dale was buying. The first hour ended. The ironclad was hit 3 more times. Calvin Brent's power rerouting kept the engines running, each time pulling energy from systems that were not strictly necessary and sending it where it was needed most. He moved through the engine room with a toolkit and the focused expression of a man who refused to acknowledge the sounds of battle because they were not his department. The Vreth reinforcements arrived. More ships poured into the shelf. The debris field made their superior numbers harder to use effectively, but There were enough of them that it still felt like standing in front of a wave. Dale watched the numbers on the tactical screen and did not change his expression. The human fleet was still fighting. The Vreth had not pushed past the shelf. That was all that mattered right now. Somewhere at waypoint 7, 14 Allied fleets were watching a beacon signal that had not gone dark. Dale intended to keep it that way. The second day began without the first day ending. There had been no pause in the fighting, no moment where both sides pulled back and caught their breath. The Vreth kept pressing and the human ships kept holding, and the battle at the Heron Shelf burned on like something that had forgotten how to stop. Dale had not slept. He did not intend to sleep, and he sat in the captain's chair on the ironclad's bridge and drank water and watched the tactical screen and called out course corrections and weapons adjustments in a voice so steady that the junior officers sometimes forgot how long they had all been awake. Laura had ordered 2 of the bridge crew to take 4-hour rest rotations and had quietly ensured that everyone ate something at least once during the night. She had not rested herself. She stood at her station and kept her eyes clear through sheer stubbornness, and did not once ask Dale how he was doing, because she could see how he was doing and she knew he did not need the question. The ironclad had taken 11 direct hits since the battle started. Calvin Brent had been in the engine room for 31 straight hours, and he had 2 junior engineers working beside him, and he had learned both their names within the first hour, which he had not known before, and he had spent the second hour quietly making sure they both knew what they were doing well enough that if something happened to him, the ship would not go dark. Nothing had happened to him. The engines were still running. The hull was cracked in 2 places, and the port side weapons array had 30% capacity. But the ship was still moving and still fighting, which was more than the Vreth had expected. Priya Oaks had run out of the prepared strike sequences by the end of the first night and had started building new ones on the fly, pulling data from the ongoing battle and adjusting patterns as she went. She had been doing this for 11 hours and showed no sign of stopping. Her weapons team had stopped asking her to explain what she was doing and had started simply executing her instructions as fast as she gave them. Nadia Cross had landed twice to refuel and had gone back up both times. Her fighter had a visible scar along the nose from a Vreth impact that had been close enough to strip the outer coating without breaking through. Ben Farrell was still flying on a damaged wing and had declined twice to stand down and let a replacement take his slot. "I can still fly it straight," he had said. The second time. "You are flying it crooked," Nadia had replied. "Crooked is fine," Ben had said and gone back up. The Allied fleet at waypoint 7 had been watching all of it. Relvan had been transmitting combat reports every 2 hours, and those reports had been read by every senior commander in the Accord more carefully than they had read anything since the war began. The numbers in the reports did not make sense by normal military standards. Human vessels were taking damage that should have forced disengagement and then continuing to fight. Human crew members were performing combat functions after injury levels that any other species would have needed to withdraw to treat. It was not that the humans were unaffected. They were hurt. The Ironclad's medical bay had been running continuously since hour 4 of The battle. 3 crew members from the Ridgeline had died when a Vreth strike collapsed, and were injured on every human ship. Nobody was pretending the cost was nothing, but nobody was stopping. The Sarathi High Marshal stood at the observation window aboard his command ship and watched the beacon signal from the Heron Shelf. He had fought in 11 wars. He had seen brave things and foolish things and many things that were both at once. He had never seen anything that looked like this. How long have they been holding? He asked. 36 hours, his adjutant answered. The marshal was quiet for a moment. What is their projected endurance? There is no model that covers this. His adjutant said carefully. Our standard calculations for sustained combat endurance assume disengagement when damage and fatigue reach certain thresholds. The humans have been past those thresholds since hour 14, and they are still fighting. Yes, a marshal. The Sarathi High Marshal looked at the beacon for another long moment and then said, prepare the fleet to move. On the Thavine command vessel, similar conversation was happening. Relvan's latest report had just come through, and the Thavine admiral was reading it at his command station for the 3rd time. Relvan wrote clearly and without exaggeration, which made the report harder to dismiss than something dramatic would have been. The report said simply that the human fleet had been engaged for 36 hours against a force that outnumbered them by a factor that Relvan declined to write down because writing it down made it seem like it should have been over long ago. The report noted that the human ships were damaged mobile. It noted that no human vessel had retreated, so he had noted that the Vreth had not advanced beyond the shelf. It ended with a single line. They are still there. The Thavine admiral set the report down and looked at his senior officers. Nobody said anything. Then one of them, a young commander who had been quiet through the whole council meeting the day before, said, we should go back. The admiral looked at him. We voted to withdraw, the admiral said. The strategic assessment. The assessment did not include this, the young commander said. Nobody put this into the assessment because nobody thought it was possible. The admiral looked at the beacon signal on his own screen. 36 hours. 14 ships. The Vreth had not passed. Aboard the ironclad, Dale was looking at a damage report when Laura touched his arm and nodded at the long-range scanner. He looked up, all blue signals. Allied ships moving toward the shelf from waypoint 7. Not just a few. A lot. Dale looked at the scanner for a long time without speaking. Something moved across his face that was not quite relief and not quite surprise. It was the feeling of something that you hoped would happen but did not let yourself believe in until it did. How many? He said. All of them, Laura said. The whole Allied fleet. Dale nodded slowly. He turned back to the tactical screen. The battle was still going. The Vreth were still pressing. There was still work to do before the Allied fleet arrived, and it could not be done by sitting still. Tell Priya to push hard on the left flank, he said. I want the Vreth formation off balance when the Allies hit them from behind. Yes, Captain, Laura said. On the Vreth command ship, and buried deep inside the Armada, the Dominion Fleet Admiral received an unexpected message from his forward scouts. The Allied fleet that had withdrawn was coming back. All of it. The admiral stared at the report. In 30 years of conquest, no enemy fleet had ever turned around. Withdrawal was permanent. It was a known fact of war, accepted across every species the Dominion had ever fought, because no commander in their right mind returned to a battle they had already left. He looked at the beacon signal from the shelf still burning. 14 ships that had been fighting for 36 hours and had not gone dark. For the first time in his career, the Vreth Fleet Admiral felt something he did not have a name for. It sat in his chest like a stone, and it made him look at the tactical screen differently than he ever had before. Had he sent an urgent signal back to Dominion High Command? The humans have not broken, he wrote. He did not know what else to say. The Allied fleet came out of the dark like a tide coming back in. They had not announced their return over the open channels. There was no formal statement from the Thavian Admiral, no declaration from the Sarathi High Marshal. The ships simply turned around at waypoint 7 and pointed themselves at the Heron Shelf, and by the time the Vreth long-range scanners picked them up, it was already too late for the Armada to reposition cleanly. Dale saw them coming on the tactical screen and said nothing. He picked up the command channel and opened a line to Priya Oaks. Push the left flank now, he said. Everything we have. Priya had been waiting for exactly this. She had been holding back a set of strike patterns for the past 4 hours. Not because she had been told to, but because she had been thinking ahead. She sent the new sequence to every human ship, and it went out fast and clean, and the left flank of the Vreth formation shook under a concentrated strike that it had not been expecting from a fleet that had supposedly been running on fumes for 37 hours. The Vreth commanders on the left flank tried to pull back and reinforce the center. That was the wrong move, but they had no good moves left. The Allies were coming in from behind, fast and in full formation, and the human ships were pushing forward from the shelf, and the Vreth Armada found itself between two walls that were both moving toward it at the same time. The Vreth had a doctrine for almost every situation. They had been conquering species for 3 generations, and their tactical manuals were thick with solutions to problems that other civilizations had solved and then cataloged. But they had no doctrine for this. Their manuals assumed that a defending force took losses, made a calculation, and disengaged. They had no page for a defending force that simply did not disengage, and they certainly had no page for an allied fleet that had already withdrawn coming back. Nadia Cross heard the Allied ship signals on the long-range band and felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized she had been holding tight. She was on her 3rd sortie in 37 hours, and her fighter smelled like recycled air and cooling metal, and she was exhausted in a way that sat behind her eyes like pressure. But she could still fly, and there was still work to do. Ben, she said over the wing channel. Still here, Ben Farrell said. His voice sounded tired but steady. The Allies are behind them. We have one good push left. I need your wing on the right side of the formation. The right side is where their command ship is, Ben said. Yes, Nadia said. There was a pause. How crooked can I fly? Ben asked. As crooked as you need to, she said. She led the fighter wing in a long, arcing approach that came around the outer edge of the debris field and angled toward the center of the Vreth Formation. The Vreth gunners picked them up early and opened fire, but the approach path Nadia had chosen used 3 large pieces of wreckage as partial cover, and she had timed the arc so that the fighters came through the gap between 2 major Vreth vessels before the gunners could redirect. It was the kind of approach that worked once, because after it worked, the enemy adjusted. Nadia had spent 3 days thinking about approaches that only needed to work once. The fighter wing tore through the center of the Vreth formation and came out the other side. 2 fighters took hits, neither went down. Ben Farrell flew the whole pass with his damaged wing, leaving a thin trail of vented fuel, which he did not mention until they were clear. I might need to land after this one, he said. You think? Nadia said. Behind the fighters, pre-his strike sequence was still running, and the Allied fleet was fully engaged now, hitting the Vreth formation from the rear with everything they had held back. During the withdrawal, the Thavin ships moved in tight, coordinated groups. The Sarathi battle group drove straight into the thickest part of the Vreth rear, which was exactly the kind of thing the Sarathi High Marshal liked to do when he had decided something needed to end. On the Ironclad's bridge, Dale watched the tactical screen change. It changed slowly at first, and then all at once. Vreth ships began pulling away from the formation, not in a clean retreat, but in the scattered way that formations fell apart when their command structure lost coherence. The command ship's defensive screen had failed under Nadia's strike, and it was moving back, and when the command ship moved back, the ships around it moved with it, and the ones behind those moved too. It became a withdrawal. Then it became a rout. Dale watched the Vreth signals moving away from the shelf on the tactical screen for a long moment. Then he looked at Laura. Is that what I think it is? He said. The Vreth are retreating, Laura said. Her voice was very calm and very quiet. Full Armada withdrawal. They are not turning to fight. They are just leaving. Dale sat back in his chair. The bridge was quiet around him. Then someone near the back of the room started clapping, and someone else joined. And within a few seconds, every person on the bridge was making noise, one way or another. Dale let it go for a moment. He thought it was earned. Then he picked up the shipwide channel and said simply, "Well done," and let that be enough. 3 hours later, when Dale was in the small conference room adjacent to the war room, when Relvan knocked on the open door, the Thavin observer looked like he had not slept either, which was unusual because Thavin generally managed their rest cycles with great precision. The council is convening, Relvan said. The Thavin admiral has requested your presence. I will be there, Dale said. Give me 5 minutes. Relvan nodded, but did not leave. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at Dale with an expression that was difficult to read, which was normal for Thavin faces, but felt different from his usual neutral observation. I have been writing reports for 6 months about the human fleet, Relvan said. I thought I understood what I was observing. Dale waited. I did not understand, Relvan said. I want you to know that I understand now. Dale nodded once. Thank you, Relvan. The council meeting was nothing like the one 2 days before. The chamber felt different. Nobody sat in the same defeated posture that had filled the room when the withdrawal vote was taken. The Sarathi High Marshal was standing When Dale arrived, which he had not been before, and he did not sit when Dale entered, he inclined his head in a way that his adjutant later told Rilvan was a formal Sarathi acknowledgement, reserved for commanders who had done something worth recording. The Thavine admiral spoke first. He said that the accord owed the human fleet a formal recognition that would be entered into the alliance record. He said that the engagement at the Har Shelf had changed the course of the war in a way that the Strategic Committee was still calculating. He said several things that were true and respectful and appropriate. Then he looked at Dale and asked the question that everyone in the room wanted answered. Captain Harmon, you did not have enough ships. You did not have enough weapons. Every calculation available said you could not hold that position. How did you know you could? The room was quiet. Dale thought about Laura standing behind his shoulder. Without being asked, he thought about Priya building strike sequences in her spare time for weeks before anyone told her to. He thought about Calvin in the engine room with his coffee mug and his modifications that were technically unauthorized, and he thought about Nadia flying a third sortie when she should have been asleep, and Ben Farrell flying crooked because crooked was fine. He looked at the Thavine admiral and said, "We did not know, we just were not willing to find out what happened if we stopped." The chamber was quiet for a moment after that. Then the Sarathi High Marshal said something in his own language that did not translate cleanly, but that Rilvan later described in his report as meaning roughly, "This is why you do not count them before they are done." The council moved on to the business of the war, which was long and complicated and far from finished, but something had changed in that room, and everyone in it knew it, and no one said anything more about what the mathematics allowed. Outside, and the ironclad drifted in the debris field with its hull scarred and its running lights steady. Inside, most of its crew was finally asleep, curled at stations or stretched on bunks or simply leaning against walls, too tired to move any farther. The ship was quiet in the particular way that things are quiet after something enormous has passed through. The Vreth Dominion was somewhere out in the dark, moving away for the first time in its history. And for the first time in its history, it was looking back over its shoulder.